The dying light of dusk seeped through the cracked blinds of the small suburban living room, casting long, shifting shadows across the faded carpet where Ellie Morgan sat curled in a corner, clutching her tattered journal as if it were her only sanctuary. Her eyes flicked anxiously toward the doorway, where her mother, Gloria, stood with an icy smile, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Honestly, Ellie, do you think anyone cares about your little scribbles? Maybe if you spent less time dreaming and more time fixing your pathetic grades, you wouldn't be such a disappointment." Gloria's words dripped with contempt, her voice rising slightly as she stepped closer, the flickering overhead light illuminating the sharp angles of her face, the creases of anger carved into her features. Ellie's heart pounded painfully in her chest. The familiar sting of humiliation burned anew as her mother's voice echoed around the room like a relentless storm. "You're so fragile, Ellie. Like glass. Easily shattered and impossible to fix." She scoffed, her heels clicking dismissively on the wooden floor before she abandoned Ellie with a cold, dismissive wave. Ellie's fingers trembled as she hurriedly flipped her journal shut, her mind racing with 1,000 unspoken fears, a swirling storm of helplessness and quiet fury that had been building for months. The room was thick with silence, broken only by Gloria's footsteps retreating into the kitchen, where the clatter of dishes sounded like distant thunder. Ellie's gaze lingered on her reflection in the window, where her trembling hands betrayed the storm inside her, an aching mixture of shame and rage threatening to spill over. She knew tonight could be the breaking point, her own silent scream muffled beneath the veneer of her calm exterior. Her breath hitched as she whispered to herself, "I can't take this anymore." The words tasted bitter, heavy with a dread she couldn't quite name. Yet deep inside, she felt something shifting, an almost imperceptible crack in the armor of her restraint, fragile yet ominous, whispering that soon everything might shatter. As shadows grew darker and the last rays of sunlight faded, Ellie clutched her journal tighter, her mind already wandering into dangerous thoughts, the faint echo of her mother's voice echoing disturbingly in her ears. A warning, or perhaps a prophecy of the chaos waiting just beneath the surface of her quiet world. Gloria Morgan's eyes darted sharply toward the doorway as her 2 younger brothers, Lucas and Daniel, hurried to set the dinner table with trembling hands, unsure whether their mother's commanding tone was born from impatience or something darker lurking beneath her veneer of civility. Her voice, honeyed yet venomous, sliced through the air as she snapped, "Hurry up, boys. We don't have all night." Without missing a beat, she turned her gaze toward Ellie, who sat stiffly at the head of the table, her shoulders tense, fingers clutching her napkin so tightly her knuckles blanched. "And Ellie?" Gloria continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "I don't know what's wrong with you lately. You're falling behind in school, and your grades are nothing to be proud of. Do you even care about your future anymore? Or are you just content to waste your time daydreaming while everyone else tries to pick up the slack?" Her lips curled into a cold smile, but her eyes flickered with something more sinister, an unspoken contempt that made Ellie's stomach churn. As her mother's words hovered like a toxic cloud, Ellie's gaze flicked to her brothers, who looked down at their plates, cheeks flushed with embarrassment and confusion. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with the heavy scent of burnt garlic and stale resentment. Gloria's voice grew sharper, almost mocking now, as she cluttered the table with a few more dishes, her nails tapping impatiently on the porcelain. "Maybe if you spent less time hiding in your little world, and more time focusing on what's important, you'd stop embarrassing us all. But I guess that's just too much to ask." Her tone was dismissive, yet beneath it lurked a volatile undercurrent, a reminder that her criticisms weren't merely about grades or future ambitions, but about asserting dominance, about crushing any flicker of independence Ellie might dare to show. Ellie's heart hammered in her chest, her mind swirling with a mixture of shame and a quiet, burning anger she dared not voice. The silence stretched painfully, broken only by Gloria's faint, sardonic laugh as she sat back, crossing her arms with a triumphant smirk as if she'd already won this quiet war of wills. In that moment, the weight of her mother's words pressed down on Ellie like an iron fist, fueling a simmering urge to break free from the suffocating grip of her manipulation. An urge that, unbeknownst to her, would soon ignite into a terrifying act that would shatter everything they knew about their fragile, fractured family. As the door swung open with a soft creak, Ellie's heart hammered against her ribs, her palms sweaty and trembling as she watched her mother step into the hallway, a sly smirk curling on her lips. Gloria's eyes immediately locked onto Mark, Ellie's boyfriend, who hesitated for a moment, unsure whether he should step inside or retreat. Gloria's voice, sharp and dripping with sarcasm, sliced through the tense air. "Well, well, if it isn't the golden boy himself," she drawled, her tone laced with mockery as she approached, face twisted into a condescending smile. "I see Ellie's taste in the boys is as questionable as her fashion sense. Must be a family trait." Ellie's cheeks burned crimson, her hands clutching her backpack so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She noticed Mark's eyes flicker with discomfort and a flicker of sympathy, but her mother's words kept echoing in her mind like relentless thunder. Gloria's gaze swept over Ellie with a cruel smirk, as if savoring her power, her voice rising just above a whisper so that only Ellie could hear. "You really think he's here for you? Or is it just another fleeting distraction before you drown in your own mediocrity?" Ellie's breath hitched, the sting of humiliation prickling at her skin. But beneath it stirred a fierce resolve, an unspoken vow that she would not let her mother's relentless mockery define her. She clenched her fists, feeling the cold metal of the knife hidden in her pocket, a quiet but urgent whisper of defiance bubbling beneath her trembling exterior. As Gloria's laughter echoed mockingly behind her, Ellie took a tentative step forward, her voice barely audible, but trembling with underlying fury. "Enough," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and determination. "You're not going to humiliate me anymore." The room seemed to freeze, the air thick with tension, as Mark's eyes widened in concern, trying to decipher whether Ellie's calm tone masked a deeper storm brewing beneath. Ellie felt her mother's gaze stilling for a moment, the smirk faltering just briefly. Then Gloria's expression twisted into a sinister grin, as if challenging her to go even further. And in that fleeting electric moment, Ellie realized that her confrontation was no longer just about words or insults. It was a silent, desperate plea to break free from the suffocating grip of her mother's cruel world, even if it meant crossing a line she could never undo. As the flickering overhead light cast a dim glow over the dining table, Gloria's voice sliced through the tense silence like a razor, sharp and unforgiving. "Honestly, Ellie, the way you dress is a disgrace," she sneered, her eyes narrowing with contempt as she gestured dismissively toward Ellie's torn jeans and battered hoodie. "Do you really think Mark would find this acceptable? Or are you just too clueless to realize how embarrassing you are?" Ellie's cheeks burned, her vision blurring as tears welled in her eyes, threatening to spill over. She clenched her fists beneath the table, feeling the familiar sting of humiliation creep through her chest like poison. Each word Gloria spat a venomous dart aimed straight at her fragile self-esteem. Mark's brow furrowed in quiet discomfort, clearly caught between wanting to defend Ellie and the suffocating pressure of his own social awkwardness. Gloria leaned forward, her voice rising to a cruel whisper. "And your grades? Do you even care? Or is it just laziness like everything else about you?" The cruel tone was like acid, burning away whatever shred of confidence Ellie had left. Her stomach clenched, and her internal voice screamed warnings. "Don't let her break you. Stand up. Fight back." But instead she sat frozen, eyes fixed on her plate, feeling the weight of her mother's words hammering into her soul, each syllable chipping away at her sense of worth, as if her very identity was being shredded apart piece by piece. The room grew colder, the air thick with unspoken accusations, as Gloria's laughter echoed mockingly in Ellie's mind. drowning out her own silent plea to be seen and understood. Slipping quietly through the shadows of her dimly lit room, Ellie closed the door softly behind her, her breath ragged and uneven as if she had run a marathon rather than just crossing the narrow hallway. Her fingers trembled as she clutching her battered sketchbook and worn poetry journal. The edges frayed from years of hidden secrets pressed into its pages. The faint glow of her desk lamp cast long flickering shadows across the cluttered space. Crumpled sketches, torn pages with jagged tears, and a collection of worn pens scattered like scattered thoughts. She sank onto her bed, knees pulled tight to her chest, while her eyes flicked over the fragile lines of her poetry. Sorrowful words about pain, suppression, and fleeting hope. Each phrase a quiet rebellion against the suffocating silence of her home. Her mind churned with the memory of her mother's venomous words, the public humiliation that left her feeling raw and exposed, like a wounded animal cornered and trembling. The ache of helplessness twisted inside her stomach, and her pulse hammered in her ears as her fingers traced the cover of her sketchbook, the rough leather feeling almost like a shield. Her eyes darted to the window, where a faint moon cast a silvery glow over the silent street. The world outside seemed untouched, safe, indifferent to her inner chaos. Her hand reached out instinctively to grip her pencil, a simple, unassuming tool that now felt like a weapon, a key to unlocking the storm roiling within. She pressed the tip against the paper, the graphite scratching softly as she began to draw. A jagged line, a fractured mirror, an image of herself reflected in shards. Her thoughts spiraled, a tangled web of rage, fear, and a desperate need for escape. "I can't stay like this," she whispered to the dark, voice trembling but resolute. "I have to find a way out." Her eyes flickered with a dangerous spark, the kind that ignites when a person reaches the edge of their breaking point. She knew her feelings could explode at any moment. Her fury simmered beneath her calm exterior, waiting to burst free in a wild, uncontrollable storm. And as she stared at her sketches and poetry, she felt the icy grip of her own suppressed rage tighten, twisting her inner world into a volatile tempest just beneath the surface, ready to shatter everything she had ever known. Later that night, Ellie moved silently through the dimly lit kitchen, her pulse pounding like a drum echoing in her ears. The soft glow of the moonlight seeped through the blinds, casting elongated shadows that danced ominously across the counters and the cluttered array of utensils. Her trembling hands reached instinctively into the depths of the drawer, fingers fumbling over the cold metal of the knife that had become her silent accomplice. The steel was heavier than she expected, almost alive in her grasp, its weight both comforting and terrifying. She clutched it tightly, her knuckles blanching, as her mind replayed the brutal scene from earlier. Her mother's mocking voice ringing in her ears, the sting of humiliation burning beneath her skin. Her breath hitched as she whispered under her breath, "This is the only way." Her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. She paused, eyes darting toward the doorway, half expecting her mother to emerge from the shadows at any moment, demanding an explanation or shouting in anger. Instead, the house was eerily silent, save for the distant, muffled sounds of her brother's restless sleep. Ellie's fingers curled around the handle of the knife, her grip tightening until her nails pressed into her palms, her body tense with a mixture of dread and resolve. She closed her eyes briefly, trying to steel herself, imagining the confrontation, how she would finally confront the chaos she had been running from for so long. Her mind conjured her mother's face, twisted with contempt, her voice a sharp dagger laced with cruelty. "You're nothing, Ellie. You'll never be enough." Gloria sneered that evening, and suddenly, Ellie saw no other way to break free from that suffocating grip of shame and manipulation. Her lips pressed into a tight line, and with a shuddering exhale, she lifted the knife, its cold surface gleaming unnaturally in the darkness, ready to carve her way through the nightmare that had haunted her every waking moment. The air grew thick with anticipation and fear, her entire being trembling as she prepared to face the storm she had unleashed, knowing full well that nothing would ever be the same again. The room felt suffocating as Ellie's trembling hand clenched the cold steel of the knife, her fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and fierce anger that had been building inside her for years. Her vision blurred with tears, but her resolve sharpened with every heartbeat as she stared at her mother seated alone in the dimly lit living room, the faint glow of the street lamp outside casting long shadows across her face. Gloria's eyes flicked up, her lips curling into that familiar sneer, as if she sensed the storm brewing within her daughter, but dismissed it as petty defiance. Ellie's breath hitched, and she burst forward, voice cracking with raw emotion. "Stop manipulating us! You're destroying everything!" Her voice echoed through the tense space, raw and unhinged. Without hesitation, she raised the knife high, the blade catching the sparse light, and in a blur of impulsive fury, plunged it downward. Gloria's eyes widened in shock just before the first piercing scream escaped her lips, blood splattering across her face and the plush carpet as Ellie's fury overpowered her hesitation. Her body jerked violently, instinctively flailing as the knife sank deeper, stabbing repeatedly. Each thrust a desperate attempt to shatter the years of emotional torment she'd endured. Gloria gasped, clutching her stomach as crimson seeped through her fingers, her voice turning into ragged gasps. "Ellie, what? What are you doing?" But Ellie's eyes were wild, unrecognizable, filled with a terrifying mixture of pain and liberation. Her hand moved instinctively, stabbing again and again, each strike resonating with a silent scream that neither words nor reason could contain. The sound of flesh tearing and the metallic scent of blood filled the air as her mother's gasps became frantic, her body collapsing forward, limbs trembling as the life seeped out of her. Ellie staggered back, panting, trembling uncontrollably, clutching the knife as if it were a talisman of her shattered innocence, her mind a whirlwind of shock, guilt, and a fleeting, haunting sense of release. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by her ragged breathing, as she stared at the scene she had only moments before believed was unthinkable, her own hand having carved a path through the woman who had wielded her own darkness over them all. Shock and horror flooded through me as I watched Gloria's trembling body slump forward onto the cold, unforgiving floor, her fingers clawing at the air in a desperate attempt to grasp some semblance of control that was already slipping away. Her gasping breath hitched and stuttered, each ragged inhale echoing like a thunderclap in the suffocating silence that had descended, broken only by the frantic screams and sobs ripping from my brother's trembling throats. Lucas's wide, tear-streaked face stared at me, eyes blinking rapidly, as if trying to process the scene, his voice cracking as he screamed. "Ellie! What did you do?" Daniel clung to Lucas, trembling, eyes darting between me and the blood pooling beneath our mother's slackening form. My heart hammered painfully in my chest, a chaos of adrenaline, fear, and a strange, sick relief twisting inside me. I felt numb, yet painfully aware of the blood warming my hands, of my breath coming shallow and uneven. For a moment I thought I'd collapse, fall into the abyss of what I'd just done, but instead, a bizarre clarity seeped through the fog of shock. The knowledge that I had crossed an invisible, irreversible line, that my actions had shattered whatever fragile sense of innocence I still clung to. Tears blurred my vision as I staggered backward, gripping the blood-stained knife like a cursed talisman, my mind racing with images of her face, contorting in pain, her final gasps echoing in my ears. The room was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid sting of smoke from burnt-out emotions. Yet amidst the chaos, an unsettling wave of relief washed over me, an unexpected, haunting liberation from a life of suffocating lies and manipulation. I had finally broken free, but at what cost? The horrifying truth that I had carved my own darkness into her, into myself, settled heavy on my shoulders, threatening to crush me under its weight. And as I stared at her lifeless form, the enormity of what I'd done sank in like a stone, dragging me into a chamber of guilt, regret, and the slow, relentless realization that I had crossed a line from which there was no return. Ellie's brothers clung to her trembling form, their small arms wrapping around her waist as they sobbed and begged her to stay, their voices cracking with desperation amid the chaos of shrieking sirens closing in. "Ellie, please, don't leave us," Lucas wailed, his tiny fists clutching her shirt in a frantic grip, eyes wide with terror and confusion. Daniel's voice shook as he clung to her hand, pleading. "You didn't mean to, Ellie. You're not a monster, right?" Their tears dripped onto her blood-stained skin, their trembling bodies pressed against her in a desperate attempt to anchor her to what little innocence still remained. She looked down at their tear-streaked faces, so innocent, so vulnerable, and felt a flicker of something unnameable swirl within her, a mixture of crushing guilt and an almost primal sense of liberation. Her mind spun, flashes of her mother's cruel face, the knife sinking into her flesh, and her own trembling hands, stained and trembling with the weight of what she'd done. The distant wail of the police sirens grew louder, a grim, relentless reminder that her world was shattering beyond repair. "Please," Lucas begged again, voice breaking like fragile glass. "Don't leave us alone." Ellie's heart thundered painfully in her chest as she tried to find her voice, but all she could manage was a hollow, trembling whisper. I can't stay," she choked out, her voice barely audible over the sirens. The weight of her choice pressed down on her shoulders. She had fractured her family forever in a single devastating moment. Yet amid the chaos, an odd, chilling sense of release washed over her, as if breaking free from her mother's suffocating grip had finally granted her the bitter freedom she'd longed for. No longer a daughter under the shadow of manipulation, but a girl who had crossed an irreversible line, one that she now realized could never be undone. As her brothers clung tighter, tears streaming down their faces, Ellie felt herself slipping into a dark, uncharted territory, haunted, liberated, and forever changed. Knowing that her act of violence had irrevocably torn apart the fragile fabric of her family, leaving behind a scar that would never fully heal. In the dim, flickering light of her small detention cell, Ellie's trembling fingers brushed aside a crumpled piece of paper tucked beneath her worn blanket. Glancing around cautiously, she discovered a hidden diary buried within a moldy, neglected corner of the storage unit, the cover cracked and stained with age. Her breath hitched as she recognized the elegant, hurried handwriting. The ink faded but still legible. Gloria Morgan's own confessional. Secrets she had concealed from everyone, even her own children. As Ellie's eyes flicked over the pages, her pulse quickened. The words revealed a twisted history. Gloria's violent temper was not spontaneous, but rooted in a past marred by betrayal and childhood abuse, a trauma she had buried deep beneath layers of deception. "I was just a girl then," the diary confessed in her mother's shaky handwriting. "Forced to hide the scars, the nightmares. I swore I'd never let anyone break me again, but inside the pain festered. When the world betrayed me, I learned to fight back, sometimes with my fists, sometimes with my mind. My mother, she was a monster, just like the one I became. I swore I'd never be weak, never let anyone control me. But beneath it all, I was broken, shattered, beyond repair." Ellie's eyes widened as she absorbed the truth. Her mother's rage was not merely a product of her manipulative nature, but a desperate attempt to mask her own unresolved trauma. Her mother's screams, her violent outbursts. They weren't impulsive acts, but echoes of a childhood soaked in betrayal, cruelty, and betrayal inflicted by those she trusted most. "I had to kill her," Gloria had written. "Not just because she ruined my life, but because I was afraid I'd become her. Another victim lost in the chaos. That's why I buried her, kept her secrets hidden, because if the world knew, they'd see the monster I am. And I couldn't let that happen." Ellie's trembling hand clutched the diary tightly, her mind racing with the chilling realization that her mother's brutality was seeded in a cycle of pain, passed down from the depths of her own fractured childhood. As she closed the diary gently, a rush of conflicting emotions overtook her. Pity, horror, understanding, knowing that Gloria's violent rage was born not solely of malice, but of a wounded soul desperately fighting to contain the darkness inside. This revelation shattered her last illusions, forcing Ellie to confront the horrifying truth that her mother's murderous outbursts, the manipulative masks, and the rage that had driven her to the edge were rooted in a lifetime of unresolved trauma, a cycle of pain that Ellie had unintentionally become a part of. With trembling resolve, Ellie whispered to herself, maybe she was never really in control. Maybe she was just fighting to survive her own monsters. As tears blurred her vision, knowing that the darkness she had once feared was not just within her mother, but also a reflection of her own fractured past. Haunted by the diary's revelations, Ellie sat trembling in the dim glow of the flickering lamp, clutching the fragile, leather-bound journal that had unraveled her entire perception of her mother. Her eyes darted across the faded pages, where Gloria's handwriting revealed a clandestine world of darkness, hidden secrets buried beneath the veneer of maternal warmth. She was involved in things I never imagined, Ellie whispered aloud, voice trembling with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The diary detailed Gloria's participation in abusive practices, her manipulative schemes that extended far beyond the household, and shockingly, her own past entanglement with murder. Ellie's breath hitched as she read about her mother's previous crime, an act born from a whirlwind of trauma, a desperate bid to escape betrayal and pain that had haunted her from childhood. The words cut deep, revealing that Gloria's rage wasn't impulsive or mindless, but rooted in a cycle of violence and suffering that spanned generations. Was she mad? Or just a prisoner of her own torment? Ellie questioned, clutching her head as a wave of nausea washed over her. She pictured her mother, eyes wild with suppressed memories, her voice trembling as she confessed in hushed tones. Sometimes I thought I was doing the right thing, to end the pain. It was the only way I knew. Her mind replayed Gloria's words, now tinted with a new, tragic understanding. The rage, the murders, the manipulations, they all stemmed from her own fractured past, passed down like a toxic inheritance. Tears streamed down Ellie's face as she realized that her mother's violence was born not from madness, but from a desperate, wounded soul, fighting against a relentless tide of trauma. A cold silence settled over her as the weight of this knowledge pressed into her chest, and she whispered, perhaps she was never truly in control, just fighting to survive her own monsters. In that moment, the horrifying truth seeped into her bones. The cycle of pain, the bloodshed, the darkness, everything was woven into a silent, cursed lineage. Ellie's breath hitched again as she closed the diary gently, her trembling hands clutching the cover, as if to hold herself together. The room seemed to darken around her, shadows dancing with the ghost of her mother's past, an endless, echoing reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters are born from the depths of pain so profound that even they cannot escape their own shadows. As I sat alone in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, the shadows flickering like restless spirits dancing across the walls, I realized I needed to pour out everything I'd been holding inside. Every whisper of rage, every shred of betrayal, every fragment of a truth too terrible to face alone. My trembling fingers traced the edges of the worn paper as I finally began drafting a letter to her. My mother, the woman whose voice still echoed in my mind, sharp and unforgiving. I took a deep breath, steadying my trembling voice as I started. Mom, I never wanted to hate you. I never wanted to feel this hollow ache that clawed at my chest every time you tore me apart in front of everyone, especially Mark, when you humiliated me so openly I thought I'd vanish into the floor. I paused, eyes welling with tears I refused to shed, and continued. You always said you loved me, but your actions screamed something else, something darker. Did you ever really see me? Or was I just a mirror for your own shattered past? My pen moved hurriedly as I recalled the nights I lay awake, listening to her screams muffled behind locked doors, the bruises I hid beneath loose sweaters, the way her words sliced through my skin worse than any blade. I remembered the lies she told about her own suffering, how she masked her pain with rage, and suddenly the pieces clicked into place. Her violence was borrowed from her own childhood, a cycle of brutality passed down like a curse she seemed powerless to break. As I wrote, I saw her face in my mind. Fiery, unpredictable, terrifying, but beneath that veneer, I sensed the haunted woman she had become, a woman desperate to rewrite her story, even if it meant destroying everything in her path. I acted out of fear and fury, yes. I whispered to myself, voice cracking. But also because I could no longer bear the weight of her lies, her manipulation, the way she used my love against me like a weapon. I wanted to understand her, to know if she was truly evil or just another wounded soul, lost in her own darkness. Still, I can't deny the horror of what I did. I stabbed her because I thought I was freeing myself from her grip. But now I see I only plunged myself deeper into the abyss. I pray you can forgive me one day. Not for the act itself, but for the pain I carry, the ghosts that haunt me, and the truth that I am both her victim and her executioner. I am haunted by the memory of her face, twisted in fury. Yet I also see the fragile woman beneath, one just as broken as I am. Perhaps in some twisted way I wanted her to understand that her own darkness left scars so deep they could never be erased, not even by death. Mom, I only wanted to break free, to escape the cycle of silence and shame that bound us. I hope that someday, somehow, you will see that I did not want to kill you. But I could no longer live under the weight of your ghost. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why I had to do what I did. I folded the letter carefully, my hands trembling as I sealed it, pressing my forehead to the cool paper. Outside the night was silent, but inside I felt a storm raging, an unrelenting tempest of grief, confusion, and a desperate hope for some kind of understanding that might never come. As I sat in the sterile coldness of the police interrogation room, the unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights flickering overhead, my mind was a whirl of fractured memories and tangled shame. Detective Harris leaned forward, his brow furrowed, voice calm, yet probing. Ellie, take your time. Just tell us what happened, from your perspective. Why did you do it? I swallowed hard, my hands trembling against the cold metal table. The room felt suffocating, walls closing in as I searched for the words that could somehow justify the unthinkable. She pushed me too far, I finally whispered, voice cracking. My mother, she never stopped. Everything was a game to her. Humiliation, manipulation. She broke me and I just snapped. It wasn't planned. It was like I was watching myself from outside, unable to control what I was doing. I didn't mean to kill her, I swear. But she left me no choice. I looked down, tears pooling in my eyes, the weight of my confession pressing down like a crushing storm. She made me feel like I was nothing, like I deserved to be punished for simply existing. And when she called me worthless in front of Mark, my boyfriend, I saw red. I grabbed the knife, just to make her stop. I didn't think I'd actually hurt her, not like that. But she fell, and I felt her blood on my hands. I didn't know what to do. It was as if the rage that had been building for years finally exploded. Uncontrollable. I tried to tell myself it was self-defense, that she had it coming, that maybe, in some twisted way, I was freeing myself from her grip. I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't keep living in her shadow, carrying her secrets, her lies. I wanted her to see that her darkness had seeped into me, and I couldn't take it anymore. My voice cracked again, trembling with the weight of my truth. The detective's eyes searched mine, trying to penetrate the layers of guilt, rage, and despair that I couldn't fully contain. You see, I whispered, she was never really the mother I thought she was. Behind her smiles was a monster hiding a terrible secret. Her own sins, her past betrayals, the manipulations that twisted everything we knew. And I just wanted her to stop hurting us, to break free from the nightmare she created. Tears spilled over, streaking my face as I closed my eyes, feeling the terrible aftermath of the act I could never undo. The room grew silent, heavy with the truth I had finally dared to voice. My confession bleeding into the cold air, trembling on the edge of redemption and damnation. As Ellie sat alone in the sterile interrogation room, the dim overhead light flickering softly, her mind drifted back to those early, fragile moments of her childhood. Memories shrouded in the fog of time, but sharp enough to pierce through her current chaos. She remembered her mother's voice, always sharp, laced with icy contempt, sneering at her smallest failures. "You're hopeless," Gloria had sneered one evening, her eyes narrowing as she snapped at Ellie for spilling juice on the carpet. Ellie had been only 6, tears prickling her eyes as she watched her mother wipe her hands disdainfully, as if Ellie's mistake was a stain on her own reputation. Or the nights when Gloria would stay up late, whispering into the darkness with a voice thick with secrets, her tone laced with anger and guilt, telling Ellie she was a burden, a mistake her mother was forced to endure. Ellie remembered hiding behind her door, clutching her small teddy, trying desperately to block out the cruel words. "You'll never be enough. You're just like her. Weak, useless." Those words echoed in her mind now, a relentless thrum of subconscious warning, feeding the urge to rebel. The most vivid flashback came when she was 12, sneaking into her mother's closet and discovering a hidden box filled with old letters and photographs. Images of Gloria's own mother, her face twisted with pain and betrayal. Ellie had stared at the brittle pages, feeling a strange kinship, sensing that her mother's rage was rooted in wounds too old to heal. A cycle of darkness passed down through generations. Her heart pounded as she remembered the first flicker of her rebellion, a tiny act of defiance when Gloria harshly criticized her for drawing a picture of a girl breaking free from chains, whispering under her breath, "You'll never escape me." That moment had planted the seed of her fury, a quiet voice inside urging her to break free, to shatter every illusion her mother had built around them. Now, as she faced her own brutal reality, Ellie understood that these memories weren't just distant shadows. They were the roots of her pain, the reasons behind her violent choices. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of sorrow and resolve as she whispered into the silence. "She never loved me. She only used me just like she used everyone, and I couldn't let her keep hurting us anymore." The room seemed to close in around her, the ghost of her past whispering secrets she had fought so hard to bury, finally rising to the surface, demanding acknowledgement. In the dim, sterile glow of the detention room's flickering fluorescent light, Ellie closed her eyes and let her mind drift into a haunting vision. A fractured mirror shattering into 1,000 jagged shards, each reflecting a different fragment of her tormented soul. She stood there, trembling, her reflection fragmented into distorted images, some showing her as a fragile girl with hollow eyes, others as a fierce, almost unrecognizable figure wielding a blood-stained knife. Her breath caught as she imagined her mother's ghost emerging from the broken glass, her face twisted with rage and betrayal, whispering venomous secrets she had buried deep. "You think you can escape?" the ghost hissed, voice echoing like a serpent coiling around her senses. Ellie's fists clenched as she stepped forward, voice trembling but resolute. "You never loved me," she whispered back, her voice cracking like shattering glass. "All you ever did was use me. Your lies, your manipulation, they won't define me anymore." As she spoke, her reflection rippled, the shards falling away to reveal her standing alone amid the wreckage, a symbol of her fractured identity, haunted but unbowed. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, each pulse echoing her buried rage and unspoken grief. As she reached out and touched the glass's jagged edge, feeling the cold sting of truth and pain. The ghost's shadow loomed closer, eyes burning with the fire of betrayal. But Ellie took a trembling step back, facing her own reflection. No longer a victim, but a warrior forged from chaos, her face a mask of defiance and pain. In that surreal, symbolic moment, she understood that to heal, she had to confront her shattered past head-on, embracing every broken piece of herself, each jagged shard a testament to her suffering and her strength, standing in the wreckage, finally ready to claim her own battered yet resilient identity. Ellie sat cross-legged on the cold steel cot, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled sheet of paper, the only thing left of her defiant plan. The sterile fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting jagged shadows across her face, which was streaked with dirt and tears. She took a deep breath, her pulse pounding in her ears, then began to write with shaky but determined strokes. Words poured from her, a raw confession woven with poetry and pain, a voice she had long suppressed. I am the shattered mirror, fractured and fleeting, yet still reflecting the truth buried deep within. I've carried the weight of her shadows, the lies that kept me chained. But tonight I break the glass. I escape the prison of her sickness, not because I forget, but because I refuse to drown in her darkness. You see, she's haunted by her past, her own wounds twisting her into something unrecognizable, a ghost that devoured her soul and tried to swallow mine in the process. I've learned that her cruelty isn't born from malice alone, but from a trauma so deep it corrupts her, like a poison seeping into every corner of her mind. And I too carry scars, hidden beneath my skin, buried beneath my tears. And I've come to realize that my violence wasn't an act of pure rage, but a desperate plea for freedom, a scream muffled for far too long. Now I stand on the brink, ready to leap into the unknown, to shed the chains of fear and guilt that have tethered me. I will not be her reflection. I whisper to myself, voice trembling yet resolute. I am more than her brokenness, more than her shattered legacy. I fold the paper carefully, sealing my truth inside, then tuck it into the narrow gap beneath the door. As I rise, I whisper, this is my rebellion, my rebirth, and slip out into the dark corridor, shadows swallowing my form as I move toward the flickering exit. I know they will try to stop me, but I've seen the truth now. The truth she tried to hide, the truth I refuse to let drown in her darkness. Tonight I am more than her victim. I am her survivor, finally free from her ghostly grip, ready to forge my own path beyond the wreckage she left behind. In the suffocating stillness of the night, Ellie found herself standing in the middle of a dimly lit bedroom, the air thick with the ghostly remnants of her past, her mother's shadow lingering like a jagged scar across the walls. Her heart pounded fiercely, echoing the chaos that had erupted within her just hours before. Yet amidst the trembling, a strange clarity settled. With deliberate steps, she approached the mirror mounted on the cracked wooden dresser, her reflection distorted and fractured, like her broken psyche. She clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the knife she'd hidden in her pocket, a silent witness to her darkest act. You think you own me, she whispered, voice trembling but unwavering. Her eyes flickered with a storm of rage and sorrow as she conjured the haunting figure of Gloria, the woman who had manipulated her, belittled her, and finally pushed her to the brink. Suddenly the room darkened further, shadows swirling as if summoned by her own trembling breath, forming a grotesque silhouette of her mother, smaller, yet infinitely more intimidating in her spectral presence. Why did you do it? The ghostly voice hissed, a haunting echo that seemed to seep from the walls. Ellie's lips curled into a bitter smile, a tear slipping down her cheek as she stepped forward. Because I needed to see the truth, she breathed aloud, voice thick with raw emotion. You hid so much behind that fake smile, behind your lies. You made me believe I was the monster, but all along, you were the one tearing everything apart. Her hand moved instinctively to the knife's hilt, trembling as she pressed it against her chest, feeling the cold metal against her skin, a final act of defiance. You haunted me, she continued, voice cracking. But tonight I face you, not as your victim, but as the one who finally understands. I won't run from the darkness anymore. I accept it. Every scar, every shadow. Because only then can I finally be free. Her breath hitched as the ghostly apparition flickered and wavered, dissolving into a mist of memories and pain. In that moment, Ellie felt a surge of liberation, her trembling hand steadying as she lowered the knife, her eyes shining with the fierce resolve of someone who had stared into the abyss and refused to be consumed. "This is my rebellion," she murmured, voice barely more than a whisper. "My final act of rebellion against the ghost of you." And as dawn seeped through the cracked blinds, Ellie stood alone in that haunted room, finally accepting her own darkness, ready to step into the world not as a victim, but as a survivor, wielding her pain as a shield and her truth as her sword. In the dim glow of dawn filtering through the cracked blinds, Ellie sat alone at her cluttered desk, trembling hands clutching a worn, ink-stained notebook, the weight of her confession pressing heavily on her chest. Her eyes, bloodshot yet fiercely determined, darted across the empty page as she hesitated, breathing in the scent of stale perfume and burnt coffee that clung to her skin, anchoring her in this moment of brutal honesty. With a tentative, trembling voice, she began to write, her words spilling out like a desperate prayer. "I killed her, Gloria, my mother. I never wanted to admit it, not out loud, not even to myself. But tonight I have to face the truth I've been running from for so long. She was a master of manipulation, of twisting every ounce of love into control and fear. She made me feel small, insignificant, like I was nothing but a shadow of her own broken past. And yet, as I stood over her bloodied body, I realized that her violence, her cruelty, was rooted in her own wounds. Wounds she buried deep, just like mine. She was a monster, yes, but also a woman haunted by her own ghosts. And God, I am so tangled in her legacy that I sometimes forget where I begin. And she ends. But tonight I am done hiding. I am done pretending that I am innocent, that I am untouched by her darkness. I want to forge a new identity, one that isn't forged in her shadow or molded by her lies. I need to walk away from her twisted story and write my own. I promise to carry her secret, not as a burden, but as a testament to my survival. I will stop living in fear of her ghost, and instead I will embrace the chaos within me, my rage, my pain, my hope, and use it to build a life that's mine alone. I swear with every fiber of my being that I will not let her define me, that I am more than her reflection, because in that darkness, I found the faintest flicker of light, my own truth, finally free to burn bright. As her pen hovered over the final lines, Ellie's tear-streaked face softened into a fragile, resolute smile, knowing that her confession was both her surrender and her rebirth, her final act of rebellion against the ghost of her mother, and the first step toward claiming herself anew. In the quiet aftermath of her symbolic confrontation, Ellie sat on the edge of her battered bed, her trembling hands clutching the edges of a worn photograph of her brothers, Lucas and Daniel, their innocent faces gazing back at her like fragile anchors in her storm of chaos, the weight of what she had done pressed down on her chest. Yet beneath the storm of guilt and remorse, a flicker of clarity began to seep through, an acknowledgement that her actions, however monstrous they seemed, were born from years of silent suffering, manipulated secrets, and a desperate hunger for control. She drew a trembling breath and whispered softly, her voice cracking, "I need you guys to know. I did this not just to break free, but because I couldn't stand the lies anymore. Mom's darkness ate us alive, and I thought I was saving us from her grip, even if it meant crossing every line I ever feared." Her eyes darted to the cracked mirror across the room, where her reflection flickered like a ghost torn between innocence and monstrosity. Slowly, Ellie reached for her phone, fingers trembling as she dialed, her heart pounding so fiercely she feared it might shatter her ribs. When Lucas answered, she hesitated, then managed, "Hey, it's me. I need to see you. I need to tell you everything, and I want to start over. We're more than her shadows. We're more than her secrets. Please, just come over." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, yet it carried the weight of her truth. An act of fragile hope, a desperate plea for connection after so many years of silence. As she waited, her eyes fixed on the doorway, she realized that healing wouldn't come from forgetting or denial, but from facing her pain head-on, embracing her darkness as part of her journey, and daring to believe that even in her shattered state, there could still be a sliver of light, faint, flickering, but undeniably hers. As Ellie sat trembling on the cold, barren floor of the police station, clutching the crumpled pages she had hidden in her palm, she watched her mother's dark secrets slowly unravel under the relentless glare of the investigators. Gloria Morgan's porcelain facade had cracked in the face of irrefutable evidence. Confessional interviews, clandestine recordings, and a series of letters revealing her twisted past. "I had no choice," Gloria had written in a trembling scrawl, her words a barely veiled admission of her first murder. Her own mother, betrayed and silenced in the shadows of her childhood. Ellie's breath hitched as a detective showed her a photograph. Gloria, young and fierce, wielding a bloody knife beneath a moonlit sky, her face twisted with rage and pain. "She was a monster," Ellie whispered, voice cracking, as her trembling fingers brushed the scar on her neck. Proof of the night Gloria had tried to silence her. In that haunting moment, Ellie realized her mother's murderous legacy stretched beyond her own actions. It was woven into a lineage of violence, manipulation, and betrayal. As the walls closed in and her mind spun with the truth, Ellie understood that Gloria's past crimes, murder, deception, and emotional carnage, would finally catch up with her. The justice they had long denied was coming to light, illuminating the darkness Ellie had been forced to endure. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the evidence tighter, knowing that her own act of violence had been the beginning of a reckoning, one that would expose her mother's heinous crimes to the world, ending her reign of terror once and for all, and perhaps finally setting Ellie free from the shadows of her mother's deadly grip. As I sit beneath the fractured remnants of the moonlight, shadows flickering across the cracked walls of my mind, I realize that my voice has finally begun to stir. No longer a trembling whisper drowned in guilt, but a fierce tide of resilience crashing against the remnants of my broken past. The silence that once enveloped me like a suffocating shroud has transformed into a voice forged in the fires of trauma and rebellion, echoing with raw honesty. I am not the monster she tried to shape me into. I whisper to the emptiness, my fingers trembling as I trace the scar on my neck, the unspoken testament to her brutality, a silent scream carved into my flesh. I see my reflection in the dark glass of the broken mirror, eyes haunted yet unyielding, and I no longer see only a girl lost in tragedy, but someone awakening, someone who recognizes her darkness not as a flaw, but as a part of her truth. "You thought I would be silenced forever," I tell her ghost, voice steady now. "But I am more than the chaos she crafted. I've stared into the abyss of her lies, and I've seen that even in the deepest shadow, there's a flicker of light, my light, and I choose to nurture it instead of hiding from it anymore." I clutch the remnants of my past, the blood, the betrayal, the scars, and hold them close, not as chains but as badges of survival. Every tear, every scream, every moment of despair has forged this new voice, one rooted in honesty, resilience, and the brutal acknowledgement that darkness is not an absence, but a weight I carry with strength. As I rise, the fragments of glass crunch beneath my feet, reflecting fractured images of a girl reborn from the ashes of her own destruction, whispering softly to the world, "I am not finished. I am only just beginning." Ellie stood motionless in the dimly lit room, her trembling hand clutching a battered journal, its pages stained with tears and blood, while her other hand hovered near a jagged shard of broken glass resting on the wooden floor. The flickering candlelight cast fractured shadows across her face, illuminating the fierce resolve burning in her eyes. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her voice trembling, yet unwavering, as she whispered aloud, "This is my truth now. No more hiding, no more pretending to be what they want me to be." Her gaze fell onto the shard, its sharp edge catching the sparse light like a mirror, fractured into countless pieces, each one reflecting a different fragment of her shattered innocence and hardened soul. She knelt, fingertips trembling as she brushed the glass gently, feeling the sting of its cold surface, a reminder of the violence she had unleashed, but also of her rebirth from chaos. "I am both the darkness and the light," she murmured, voice thick with raw emotion, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of pain and defiance. Standing slowly, she turned her back to the mirror, revealing a silhouette that had been battered but unbroken, a girl who had plunged into her deepest fears and emerged with scars that no longer defined her as a victim, but as a survivor. Her fingers traced the edges of her journal as she whispered, "I will carry this weight, these wounds, and this truth, because in owning my darkness, I find my strength." With a final glance at the shards gleaming on the floor, she closed the journal, clutching it tightly to her chest, as if it were a shield, and stepped out into the quiet darkness beyond the door. Her silhouette disappeared into the night, a symbol of resilience forged in chaos, ready to carve her own destiny from the fractured remnants of her past. Ellie stood motionless on the edge of the quiet street, her breath shallow as the cold night air brushed against her skin, the faint glow of distant streetlights casting long shadows that danced across her face. Her eyes, glossy yet distant, fixated on the horizon where the darkened sky melted into a blur of muted stars, attempting to reconcile the chaos that had unfolded within her. An act so monstrous, yet rooted in a deep, primal urge to escape her mother's suffocating control. She clutched the worn journal to her chest, feeling the rough edges biting into her palms, a tangible reminder of the pain she had unleashed and the truth she now carried like an unshakable shadow. Her lips parted slowly, trembling as she whispered under her breath, "Is this really over? Or am I just running from what I've done?" Her gaze flickered with a complex mixture of agony and trembling hope, tears threatening to spill, but held back by a resolve she barely understood. Around her, the shadows seemed to stretch, whispering silent accusations. Yet she refused to turn away. Instead, she took a hesitant step forward, her movements tentative but determined, as if each footfall was a silent declaration that she would bear the weight of her actions, embrace the darkness she had forged in the crucible of her despair, knowing that the lines between liberation and damnation blurred in her mind. Her voice, barely audible, broke the stillness. "Maybe I've finally found my freedom, or maybe I've only begun to face what haunts me." With a heavy breath, she turned her back to the fading horizon, her silhouette a fragile yet defiant figure against the vastness of the night, an echo of fractured innocence, seeking meaning amid the remnants of chaos, forever caught between the shadow of her mother's brutality and the fragile flicker of her own hope for redemption.